Tell me how you are going. How are current affairs affecting you? Are you being adversely affected by the pandemic, by the current social unrest in the world? I have the experience that goes back to the racial riots of the 1960s, the movement for equality that came out of that, the anti-war movement. Let me tell you, the world positively changed. So don't be too concerned about the struggles of today. It's positive that people are rebelling. Perhaps not, violence is never positive, but the action of saying enough is enough when things are enough, that's positive. That's positive and it can lead to great things. So I'm just telling you from my experience, because I don't know if many of you lived through the 1960s. I came into it as a young adult, and the oppression of the paternalistic, male-dominated, certain type of white male-dominated 1950s was oppressive to many people. And hasn't society moved back towards that a little bit? We've been complaining that our politics have become white male-dominated. So things will change. It won't necessarily be brought about by violence. It was actually a lot of the peaceful demonstrations that brought about the most change. It was peaceful demonstrations that brought about the anti-war movements of that time, the 1960s, and that brought about a lot of the change. We had the Year of the Disabled, the Year of Women. It wasn't just a year, it was a movement that started, that went on and continued to make progress. I won't go into all the disadvantages that were before that time, but we made huge strides. And of course, the equal rights movements and gradual more respect for religions, of people's freedom to practice their own religion, their own faith. And I have seen a lessening of those rights over the last 10, 15 years. And it's like I'm saying, where is the protest? We needed the youth to come forward and say enough is enough, which is happening now. This is positive. So don't be too frightened by the fact that there is a strong rebellion going on, because it will lead to peaceful rebellion and it will bring positivity. Now, your pandemic, I know, well, you should be concerned. It's concern and even fear that is going to encourage us to continue social distancing and doing all the actions, the hygiene actions that we need to do when we have a pandemic. So that fear is a good thing. And from it, don't fear the economy problems. Things will be okay. We can look back on history. My mother was born in 1910, so she caught the Spanish flu when she was 9 years old. She was ill for 2 years. That gave her an incredible immunity, and she went through all the rest of her life, right through to late adulthood, and she never had another dose of the flu. She had such a strong immunity from having been ill from that pandemic and having survived it. And the world didn't crash, the economy didn't crash after the 1918-19 flu. The world went on into a boom period. There was a huge improvement in the economy for the lower economy people, the people on the lowest incomes. They began to get higher wages. They got shorter hours to work. There was a huge movement of rebellion, of recognizing that many of our essential workers were on extremely low wages and their conditions were improved. So from that pandemic, there was a lot of social change that was good, that has lasted right throughout. There was, as I said, an affluent period leading right through the 1920s, right through until the late 1920s, where things were good. 10 good years of affluence. So don't be too afraid of what might happen after a pandemic, because we can look back on history and see that everything was okay. So I just wanted to pass on that, the tips from my mother that everything was okay after the pandemic, and the tips from me that things were improved after the social unrest of the 1960s. I've lived them, my mother lived them, so I can pass on that history because it's not there for many of you to remember. You've only got accounts that you read about, and it will be okay. I'm in the most vulnerable age group, and I'm not afraid. I'm living in an area where we're social distancing. I'm in a rural community. Everybody around us is social distancing, and we'll be fine. So a little bit of fear is okay because it can be good. It can protect us. A little bit of social unrest, a lot of healthy social unrest, peaceful protesting will be good. It will be positive. It will bring about the change that frankly needs to happen. So be encouraged. Now, I'll move on from there to some of the prejudices us artists experience, because we experience prejudices too. And all the great artists have experienced them, and I will read out some of the criticism that has been levelled at some great artists, and that might help you feel better if you are getting criticised for what you're doing. Because it doesn't matter what we do as artists, we're never going to please everybody, and we shouldn't try. I've been fortunate in my career that I've been able to do what I wanted to do, and there's been enough people who have loved what I wanted to do that I've been able to earn my living as a professional artist through the decades. And now in my retirement, I can pass on many of these tips to you. But no, I don't please everybody. If you look at my YouTube videos, you'll see that I don't have 100% approval ranking on all of my videos. There's always the people that are going to hit the don't like. That's fine. They're actually helping boost my channel, because everybody who hits that like or dislike, it's still acting the same as to boost the views on my channel. So if I tried to do art that everybody loved, it would be pretty bland. One of the world's greatest Impressionist artists, Sir Arthur Streeton, submitted a painting to a Paris gallery. He received a rejection slip and the painting back. The note said, "Your painting lacks clarity." Sir Arthur Streeton penned a letter back saying, "Lack of clarity is my strong point." One of the world's greatest landscape painters and also a skilled, trained portrait artist from Britain was John Constable, and he received this criticism from a Paris gallery. "Nothing is clearly defined in the works of this painter, and the subjects themselves are badly drawn. It is impossible to identify the type of tree represented, or whether an outline start or finish. His skies are sullied with greys, and his waters are sheets of ice not yet scratched by the skates." Some artists have won my greatest respect for their humility and humour in criticising themselves. Pablo Picasso is one. When praised for being a great artist, he reprimanded the praiser and said, "No, Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci were great artists. I am an entertainer." And often one can respect an artist's work without respecting their values. And I mean, that is how it is with prejudices. They're things that we learn. And many artists are learning prejudice as they learn art from various teachers. I mean, some artists who do wonderful line and wash will teach that only their way of doing line and wash is correct. Some artists who do watercolour are purists and teach only their way of doing the work is correct. And that is why this is not a pure line and wash or a pure watercolour that would be approved. I am breaking the rules that many people who are dogmatic about their way, that their way is the only right way. I'm showing you I'm doing a work that is not pure watercolour, that is not purest line and wash. But it's still watercolour and it's still line and wash. Because you can learn from how people do things, the very best that they do, but you can reject the dogma. Now, Max Meldrum, whom you may not know of, because often, sometimes the greatest painters may not be the greatest commercial artists, as in commercially becoming household names. But Max Meldrum was a great tonal impressionism. I greatly admire his training. He was one of the best tonal impressionist teachers, and I studied under one of his leading students, Alan Martin. So I highly respect that training. However, this is his opinion of people who paint pretty pictures. And my voice doesn't carry the note of disdain that he would have used as he said this. A popular and money-attracting form of painting that contains an exaggeration of colour, sentiment and detail. Children with tears on their cheeks, babies, animals, flowers, etc. They are certain to please and are placed on chocolate boxes and postcards. In short, a pretty picture is made up of things known, covered with a veneer of sentiment and a disregard for the truth of what is visual. Meldrum referred to such concoctions as commercial art in a gold frame, and that with great disdain. So here you are. You can learn from the artist all the best that he has to teach, but you can reject the prejudice that's inherent in those words, the prejudice against people who choose to paint a pretty picture. Painting a pretty picture is not a bad thing in itself. So it's just not tonal impressionism, that's all. Like choice of religion, choice of belief, choice of activities. Because we don't choose to be or like somebody else, or because we were born different to somebody else, doesn't make us right or wrong. And any more than your choice of art makes you right or wrong. So keep that in mind and paint as you love and as you choose. And if it's not disrespectful to others, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. When you learn from somebody, take from them the best that they offer that you feel fits your style. Be an eclectic learner and reject any dogma that's there that doesn't fit with your philosophy of life, your choice of art. Because I'm social distancing, a local, Daryl Rain, has been kind enough to go out and be my eyes for me, and he's supplying me with some wonderful local subjects of the rural landscape to paint for you. So the first scene that I did from this wonderful old Clunes property was easier to complete because it was less complicated than this scene, and I did it in pen and ink. And it's already published here on YouTube for you to view. It was a far simpler subject than the one that I'm doing here in mixed medium, or predominantly line and wash. Now, as you can see, I'm going into opaque wash over the transparent wash because I'm wanting to set the background back into the distance. Because it's such a complicated scene, it's important to not try to have everything in focus. As you see in the camera, the human eye sees differently to the camera, and you need to decide what your major focal point's going to be. And I decided it would be this rusty old iron gate and the timber fences, but just the front of the timber fence. I want the fence then to go back into the distance with both aerial and lineal perspective. The foreground grasses become more important than the trees at the back. The trees at the back are wonderful trees and they make a wonderful feature painting, but not in this painting. So my first thing that I want your eye to see is the two vertical fence posts. And then I want you to go across and see the ramshackle building. And then you pick up the archway that is the two eucalypt trees, and then coming down the old dead tree, the branches, and then you come back and your eye wanders through these grasses and the wildflowers amongst them, and back through the pattern of the sky with the suggestion of clouds. So it is a very busy scene, so it's important to reduce a lot of that busyness of the complexity of the landscape by hazing it back and just having your main parts of your painting with the greatest contrast of light and shade, the greatest jump of colour, and the rest going back hazy and out of focus. Otherwise, you just have too much to view. So I have painted most of the subject that was in the photograph, but I have reduced the accents, the focal point of that most of the subjects, and just kept the main points of interest in focus. And that allowed me to do a complex subject without the whole work being too detailed. Often the success of a painting isn't in what we paint, but what we leave out of a scene or what we throw out of focus in a scene. What I'm doing here is putting down a semi-opaque watercolor wash. It's a milky wash, and the color I'm using is nickel titrate yellow. I'm putting it down in varying degrees of thickness, depending on how far back, how atmospheric I want the area that you're looking at. So we've put in our fencing and we've put it in with correct lineal perspective. And now we've created the aerial perspective of pushing it back into a haze. This has helped me achieve the three-dimensional effect, and it's also overcome whatever color tint the filming. Each film process has a color tint to it. The human eye can pick up far more subtlety of atmosphere. It's winter here in Australia, and I guess I'm trying to capture the feeling of the sun breaking through the morning haze. So I'm trying to capture the atmosphere that I might have seen from my own window here where I'm living in this lovely rural setting. So I'm taking a compromise between what I'm able to see and what the camera in the hands of Daryl Rain has seen. And so I'm putting together a combination of my own vision along with the line drawing that I've been able to achieve from the photograph. So it's a combination of using the photograph and my own vision of nature to influence what I've created as a painting. So I never let the photograph dictate to me how I should paint, but I use my vision, my knowledge of nature, what I've seen with my own eyes. I'm inspired by nature, and so it's a combination of using a photograph because I've needed to use a photograph because I can't get out, and what I'm actually seeing here, looking out across the landscape, which is the hazy winter environment with we're getting lovely sunny afternoons, which break through that early morning haze. And that's what I've tried to capture. So it's sort of like when I start to paint, my muse comes and talks to me. The painting suggests to me how I should paint it. I don't paint in a style. I don't show you one way of painting and say, this is how you do it. I have been taught so many different mediums and so many different techniques. I've studied under so many artists. And when I go to paint a scene, I let that scene influence me, and it sort of tells me how I should paint it. And I don't go to it with a style in mind. Nature doesn't come in a style. I go to it to be inspired by the scene. If you like, I open my mind and I let my muse sit on my shoulder and tell me how that scene needs to be painted.